Is there any real international terrorism, or is it all cooked up by criminal governments to keep us in fear in the post-9/11 world? Are you and I, our police and our politicians, the targets for the most powerful wave of propaganda ever? But we start with the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, whispering omerta, omerta under his breath. Are we being ruled by a bunch of the country's most thuggish toffs from Eton and the Bullingdon Club? Journalist Nick Mutch recently graduated from Oxford and he didn't like what he saw. And he joins me on the line now. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the Politics Show.
Hi there, Tony. How are you?
I'm fine, Nick. Thanks. First of all, I suppose I should ask you, what was it about your experience at Oxford and what really triggered your interest in the Bullingdon Club?
So, I originally got involved just because quite a lot of the national papers, in particular, I did some work for Der Spiegel, the German weekly, but it was something that was kind of very obviously going on everywhere. People were always kind of talking about the Bullingdon Club in hushed whispers. Everyone had kind of seen the photographs of David Cameron. A couple of them got in trouble with the police when I was there, but no one actually knew anything about the club, any of its traditions, any of its history, anything like that. And so I decided, well, something needs to be done about that. So I decided to really, really try and dig as deep into the club, all its histories, all its traditions, but not just that, to work out the links between what people in the club were like then and what they're doing now. And if you can see, and one of the points I try and make is that a lot of what happens with the Bullingdon Club isn't just sort of useful indiscretions. These people go on to maintain the connections they made in the Bullingdon Club 20, 30 years later when they're in high positions in journalism, politics, wherever, financial institutions, list goes on.
Now, I know that one of the things that's really helped in your research massively is discovering a whole load of these Bullingdon Club photographs, because one of the first pictures of David Cameron and George Osborne in the Bullingdon Club was published in the Daily Mail, and I think they got sued for it. So there was obviously a great deal of sensitivity about publishing these pictures of Bullingdon Club photos. People saying, well, it's a private photograph, you're not allowed to, and if you do, we're going to take you to court. And so there's been a reluctance to publish those photographs. But I know you've managed to get loads of these old photos of the Bullingdon Club boys. How did you manage to do that?
So, well, I did quite a large article on about exactly what happened in the Independent about 8 or so months ago. A lot of them were just hanging on the walls of a tailor called Eden Ravenscroft. Now, that's the tailor that makes the very famous Bullingdon outfit, which is reputed to cost around £3,500. And interestingly, I also dug up an old pamphlet called The Rules of the Club, and from 1850. The uniform back then is exactly the same as it is now. Now, effectively, a lot of these photos, some of them circulate online. You can find them in very old image archives. A lot of them are in college archives, so not really publicly accessible except to researchers or professional journalists. But I guess what surprised me was that no one had really done this before, even for the photos that were in public domain, which include some very famous people, Cecil Rhodes, King Edward VIII. There's another one with Archibald Primrose, Earl of Rosebery, Prime Minister in the 1890s, that have just never been discovered. But the most interesting ones were the ones on the wall of Eden Ravenscroft, especially as one of the photos there was one of David Cameron, which had never been seen before or never been published before.
Now, the Bullingdon started as a cricket club. I couldn't quite believe this, back in the 1780s. But was it really about cricket?
So, one of the interesting things is a lot of their old match logs still survive, and it's very evidently obvious that they weren't very interested in cricket at all. It has them playing a lot of cricket clubs, the Marylebone Cricket Club for one, that says Bullingdon lose by 9 wickets. Bullingdon all out for 64, or in one case, the most recent match register just has Bullingdon gave up the match after a couple of overs. So cricket club was kind of a veneer to give some sort of respectability to it.
It certainly doesn't sound like a dream team to run the country, does it?
No, not particularly. And I think that's one of the things that often comes in for criticism with the club, is that getting into the club is almost entirely dependent on wealth, particularly landed wealth. There is no... you don't have to be particularly intelligent or socially savvy or anything to get into the Bullingdon Club. It is basically just the richest of the rich.
Now, what about this business of Boris Johnson whispering? Well, I didn't whisper it. I was saying it quite loudly. Omerta, Omerta. Is that true?
So that's an account I have gotten from a journalist from Sebastian Shakespeare, who now writes the Daily Mail. He actually wrote. There's an old book, a very fascinating old book from published in 1988, called The Oxford Myth, which has contributions from a number of people, one of which is actually Boris Johnson. And he basically, in this, Sebastian Shakespeare writes an article where he interviews someone from David Cameron's Bullingdon Club, gives them an on-the-record interview. And he said that whenever he's tried to talk to discuss this with Boris Johnson in the future, Boris just whispers Omerta, Omerta to him, just means silence, silence, or code of silence. That said, the code of silence is far from inviolable. I've had quite a number of old members speak to me, mainly off the record, and some of them in particular aren't exactly particularly proud of their past. For instance, they kind of wish it had never happened, or now that they see everyone they know from the club in very high positions in society, they might start to feel a little bit embarrassed.
Well, let's look at some of those. There's Lord Halifax, during World War II, was the guy who was seen as the most Nazi British lord, who Rudolf Hess went to try and meet up with in 1941. There's also more modern version of the Bullingdon Club, the Dukes of Norfolk, Northumberland, Westminster, Roxburgh and Buccleuch. Now, I noticed also that the Duke of Buccleuch, back in the Second World War, was close to King George VI as the Lord Steward of the royal household, but he accompanied Lord Brocket to celebrate Hitler's 50th birthday. It was a matter of personal delight to Hitler that the Duke, a man who served in the very court of Britain's royal family, was there. And Buccleuch was opposed to any war with the Nazis. When it did break out in 1939, he joined something called the Peace Aims Group to try and urge a truce with Germany, letting Hitler keep all the lands he'd stolen in Europe. So you've got some interesting characters here. More modern one, Rupert Soames and the Rothschilds family. Jacob Rothschild is apparently worth $7 billion, although a chap called Kevin Carr, who we have on this show quite regularly, Nick, who used to work for the Sunday Times Rich List, would probably disagree. I mean, this really is a pretty impressive list of people, including names like von Bismarck and as you said, Cecil Rhodes. Yeah.
Some other interesting people, for instance, one is Nicky Oppenheimer, who used to be chair of De Beers, the mining group that was set up by Cecil Rhodes. It's not just Tories as well. There's a UKIP figure, quite a senior UKIP figure, Stuart Wheeler, who was treasurer of the party until 2014, used to be a large Tory donor, donated quite a lot directly to UKIP, so there's that influence there as well. It's far from just the Tories. Lord Longford, who was a Labour peer until very recently, was in the club in 1925. It's really quite a staggering list. I'm sure others will come to me. Tom Lawson, who was son of Chancellor Nigel Lawson. I did a piece for Byline on what happened there. In 2000, the club got effectively smashed up a marquee, and it took 30 cops to shut that particular party down. Now, this is all verified. It's been reported on. That was reported on in Parliament at the time, except Bullingdon Club, as not that much was known about it then. It never really got that much traction.
OK, what about stories about the Prime Minister, though, David Cameron? And have there been denials, and have you managed to get to the bottom of any of them?
So there's the one story that everyone knows, or that has been commonly reported by about Cameron, is how a bunch of them all spent the night in a cell. This was in 1987. Boris was there as well. However, I've managed to get accounts from the time, and Cameron has always denied he was there. Now, that's not true at all. Cameron definitely was there. What happened is they smashed a restaurant window. The police were called. They got chased down into the botanical gardens of Oxford, and a couple of them managed to get away. And of that couple who managed to get away, there was David Cameron and Boris Johnson, who managed to slip down a side street. And one of the quotes that was given about it, this quote wasn't originally gotten by me, this was originally published in the Financial Times about 5 years back, was that they always joked that the two that ran from the police would be the two that ended up running for Parliament and then running the country many, many years later.
I mean, is it fair to say that as part of your Bullingdon Club membership, you're rewarded for doing as much damage as possible, and it's a kind of way of institutionalising bad behaviour?
Well, one of the common allegations that is made is that these people, when they do all these things when they're younger, that yes, not only are they encouraged, one of the guys told me that they kind of made a fetish out of doing as much damage as possible, but it's also that if you're a group of 10 very wealthy people who are going to probably go on to very important things in society, everyone's got dirt on each other. It means that everyone will stick together later in life because they all have the dirt. They all have the dirt on each other. They effectively all have some form of influence, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does, but I mean, it's also a bit worrying, is that they might start doing the same sort of damage to the country and to us.
Yeah. Well, that, I think, probably outside of my expertise, but there are it's not difficult to draw parallels.
I'll tell you what, I'll, at this point, Nick, I'll bring in old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers. I mean, Martin's an old Oxford student, not the same college. I mean, which college did you go to, Martin?
I went to St Catherine's College. Charwell Polytechnic, as some of the posher colleges used to refer to.
I mean, Nick's come out with a pretty amazing bunch of dirt, I suppose, on these people, and it is worrying. Certainly, if they're encouraged to do damage, to commit crime, in order to have dirt on each other, so that then they can possibly be blackmailed in the future, or they'll keep quiet, as we were hearing the mafia omerta sign. But what when these people are let leash on a country, on an economy?
Well, I mean, I think you can compare them to something like the Skull and Bones Society at Yale and Harvard in the US. These elite kind of clubs for the super wealthy, where they basically do things which leads to them having dirt on each other, etc. And of course, the Bullingdon Club is not entirely Tory, but pretty much so. I mean, certainly, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but you have to go to Eton to be in the Bullingdon Club, do you not? Perhaps you could enlighten me there. I always presumed
the majority of people come from Eton, not exclusively, probably about 70-odd% do. George Osborne went to St Paul's, and not everyone goes to Eton, but it definitely helps.
Nick, also, what about deaths? Because there's been some deaths associated with the Bullingdon Club, some quite nasty ones, haven't there? And also, I mean, drug taking, it seems a little bit tame compared to talking about the people that have died.
So one story that I found that is all on record, has been through the courts actually, was in 1977, where a couple of guys, and one of them in particular, the driver, were in the Bullingdon Club at the time and were apparently, according to a source I have, coming back from one of their dinners. And effectively, the guy, now I have to make perfectly clear here that he was not convicted of drunk driving. He was convicted of dangerous driving causing death after quite a long trial. Now you can see a nice photo of him in the Bullingdon Club from that exact year. Gets off with a fine and a driving ban, effectively. Now, he crashed into a car and he killed 4 other people, one of which was a Chelsea footballer, quite a well-known guy called Peter Houseman. Now, as for why this has never come out, I'm not entirely sure. Either people have kind of kept the omerta about it, or because it was about 10 years before Cameron or Osborne were involved, it's never been directly linked to them. I thought what that showed a bit more is that a lot of these people will do whatever kind of damage to property it is or damage to life, but they almost never suffer any sort of consequences for it, if that makes sense. The police will let them go after a night where they smash a restaurant up. A couple of years ago, one of them one of the restaurant owner wanted to have the group charged, and the police refused to do it. This was back in 2004. Yeah, effectively, it's not even so much what they do, but the fact that they always get away with it.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's almost taken as read, the drugs, I suppose. But what about being banned from Oxford? Because I know, they've been to so many different premises where the owners have got fed up with having the place smashed up that they're now having to sometimes actually go outside Oxford to have their events.
No, that happens all the time. They've been banned, I think, since the 1890s from meeting inside Oxford. And sometimes they'll book, for instance, under an assumed name. They would never be able to book somewhere under the Bullingdon Club. The owners just, for instance, the party that I actually witnessed myself last year, they just booked under an assumed name. And generally, if they're found out to be the Bullingdon Club, which happens, they just get kicked out of the establishment.
Now, I suppose one of the most worrying things about this is a bit like that Martin was saying about like the Skull and Bones in the United States, is that it's not just something that happens at Oxford and a bit of fun that then gets forgotten about, Nick. Because I know you've put together some evidence that the Bullingdon Club people regularly meet up, actually, after they've long left Oxford. Yes.
So, and I don't want to, I'm not going to say how I know this, but I know at least two occasions, one of which has been reported was reported, I think, in the Diary of the Standard about 7 years ago, where they all met up to do this was just when Boris was first running for mayor, so a little bit longer. And about 6 of them from the same club met up to do a fundraiser for them. I also know that they often, or at least once in the last couple of years, had a reunion dinner at the house of one of the guys who was in Cameron and Boris's club, and Cameron and Boris were all there for it. Now, you can say, okay, well, they're just catching up with university friends, but when you have people for that same club, writing about them in national newspapers favourably, or you have Cameron, in one case, appointed one of the guys he was in the Bullingdon Club with to oversee a panel on state school spending. It's difficult to say they're just catching up with old friends when it's clear that actually, in some cases, they may be having influence on policy.
Now, Nick, whereabouts can people follow your work online and keep up with what you're up to? Because I know you did I'll put a link on our show page at thisweek.org.uk to your article, recent one in the Daily Beast, which has got a lot of this stuff in it, which really, drew my attention to you doing this. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anybody in the London media doing this, just you as a freelance digging it out. But where can we follow your work online?
So I've got quite a large series of pieces coming, of which I've already done about 4 on byline.com. I want to go through each of the photos, who was in it, if we know anything about what happened there. I'm also a contributor, as you said, to the Daily Beast, and I have been tweeting some of my material out. My Twitter handle is @NickTMutch, MUTCH.
I think there's also something else worth saying here, and that is that we, failed to identify quite a lot of people in those photos. So we want to kind of have a kind of wanted competition, so people can have a look at those. And if you can identify who they are, some of the individuals who were in the Bullingdon Club sort of 10, 20 years ago, some more recently, it'd be quite nice to have a whole list of who they were, and then to be able to see those photographs of them.
Here's the really interesting thing, is that of all the photos, most of them are named. However, all the photos between 1987 and 1992, when Cameron, Osborne and Boris were in the club, have all had the names scrubbed from the bottom of them. There's one in particular of David Cameron in 1998, where the names have been scrubbed, and none of the other, I managed to identify 2 or 3 other people in that photo. The rest of them are unknown. They could be MPs, they could be financiers. There's another one in 1990 where I've not identified anyone. There's one person who I suspect is actually a very high-ranking Tory MP. I'm not going to name them because they've denied it to me, and I haven't had anyone positively identify them for me. But if anyone was to look at the photo and go, oh, that's so-and-so, well, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's make sure those are up online somewhere, very easy to have a look at, so people can scan them in, blow up the photos, blow up the faces, and see if not in an explosive way, but obviously, to make the faces bigger so you can see exactly who they are. Also, Nick, one of the main reasons that I wanted to get you on to is because this is extremely damaging to the Tory party to see that so many of their senior people, Boris, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, the Mayor of London, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer are from this club. It does look as if this is basically a little private club running the country.
If I can actually add one more name to that I only discovered recently, is a guy named Philip Dunn, who is a minister. He's Minister for Defence Procurement. So that's another minister who's in the club. I believe there's a couple more that I have yet to find, but that's just another example.
This is some ongoing work, isn't it? Yes, very good that we're talking about education just after we speak to you, because it's like when you leave school, you think you finish your education. No, think again. Because you put a piece together for the Daily Telegraph, didn't you, in the run-up to the elections last year? Just tell us briefly what happened there.
That's effectively true. This was probably about 2 weeks before the election. I spoke to two of their very senior reporters, rather not name names, and they told them about the story that I had about all of these photographs, and they were extremely keen to do the story. Came down to Oxford, discussed it with me several times on the phone, probably spent about 3 or 4 hours going over the story with them. All of a sudden, complete radio silence. Wasn't sure why. They never told me why. I called about a week later. They said they'd have to talk to someone high up and see what was happening now. Never heard anything again. That Sunday, which was just before the election, which was where the piece was originally going to be published, it was full of stories about how the Conservative government was the greatest government of all time and George Osborne was the greatest Chancellor since William Gladstone. You can effectively make your own mind.
Well, I think Martin would probably beg to differ. Is George the greatest Chancellor since Gladstone?
No.
Anyway, look, listen, Nick, that's been fascinating talking to you, and we'll be definitely following your work and hope to have you on again sometime. And let us know if you have any more revelations about these people, because I think we're supposed to be living in a democracy, aren't we? Not in this kind of small club of violent toffs running everything. I'll just leave the final word with you, Nick.
So I guess one thing that I've always tried to put out is that I don't think this is just about how the country is run now. This is the country's history. This goes back to the 1790s, and you've got the most prominent people in the world here. And I think the fact that still people very powerful try and shut all this information down is effectively what really annoys me is that this is history. Is you can't really this is one of the most kind of essential clubs to understand the British class system, and they effectively don't want the truth about how the British class system runs to be revealed. And that's one thing that I want to try to do, is make that kind of contribution to history effectively by showing this club, for all its faults and for all its occasional good things, what it is and what its place is in British history.
OK, Nick Mutch, freelance journalist at byline.com. Thanks very much for joining us on The Politics Show. Thanks.
Your difference is our strength. On Bristol's BCFM 93.2.
And now I'm joined in the studio by Christine Townsend. Thanks for waiting patiently there, Christine. And I know that you have a few things to say about our education system here in Bristol. I just wondered if you just have any comments on what we just heard there, because I'm pretty shocked to hear that that things like the just the identity of people who are in this Bullingdon Club is being kept secret, and that if a newspaper publishes a photograph, they get sued. I think it's something like £20,000-30,000 the Daily Mail had to pay for just publishing a picture of the Prime Minister. It seems like that should be their job.
Well, yeah, I think I would agree. I'm pretty shocked, really, how much information this guy is kind of informing us about. But what I find interesting is that clearly these people go back a long way. They were educated at school together because they were all at Eton. They all then went to the same college in Oxford, and now they're all running the government. And it seems that they've got the judicial system and the police in the back pocket of some of that establishment if there are people going to court and they're not necessarily getting the sentences that ordinary people would get if they did some really serious dangerous driving and killed somebody.
Well, it's bizarre, isn't it, that we were having the same sort of conversation in the first hour with Carla Denyer, the Green Councillor, about social justice, just basically to do with big corporations being treated much better than ordinary people who are struggling to survive, just when it comes to things like HMRC. But anyway, look, let's focus down here on the on education here in the city. And I know you're standing as a mayor candidate coming in May.